My name is Eleanor Voss. I am 29 years old, and 3 weeks ago, I sat in a lawyer's office and watched my mother's face go pale as a document was read out loud. For 29 years, my mother called me the mistake, not to my face at first. Later, she stopped bothering to hide it. My brother Marcus got the raised voice of pride. I got the sigh, the look that said, "You again." At my grandmother's funeral, my mother pulled me aside and told me not to make a scene, not to embarrass the family, not to speak unless spoken to. I smiled. I nodded. Then I did something she didn't know about, something my grandmother had asked me to do 6 years earlier, quietly, patiently, without ever telling anyone else in the family. The next morning, my mother and brother discovered that the lake house they had already promised to a developer wasn't theirs to sell. It never had been. My mother went white. Marcus, who had already spent money he didn't have on a deal he thought was done, called me screaming. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time below. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now let me take you back to 6 years ago, when my grandmother said something I didn't understand until the night the will was read. My grandmother's name was Josephine Voss, but everyone who loved her called her Jo. She smelled like cedar and coffee grounds, always a little of both, because she kept a coffee tin full of nails on her workbench and never once threw it out. Her house sat at the edge of Miller's Lake, an hour outside the city, with a porch that creaked in exactly the same place every time you stepped on it. Third board from the left, always. I used to test it on purpose, just to hear it. I was 11 the summer she taught me to sand a piece of wood by hand, instead of using the electric sander my brother preferred. "Machines rush," she said. "Rushing hides mistakes instead of fixing them." Her hands were rough, cracked at the knuckles, warm anyway. I didn't understand what she meant. I just liked that she said it to me and not to Marcus. At home, in the city, things were colder. My mother kept the house so clean it smelled like nothing at all. Not lemon, not lavender, nothing. Just the flat scent of a place that didn't want fingerprints left on it. My footsteps on the hallway floor sounded too loud there, like I was intruding on furniture that mattered more than I did. We had dinner together most nights. My mother, my father, before he passed, Marcus, and me. Marcus talked about his grades, his internship, his plans. My mother listened with her whole body leaning toward him. When I spoke, she'd nod without looking up from her plate. My grandmother noticed. She never said it outright. But every Sunday she'd call the house and ask for me first, before anyone else. "Put Eleanor on," she'd say, and I'd watch my mother's jaw tighten just slightly every time. One October evening at the lake house, we sat shelling walnuts on the porch, the air smelling like wood smoke from her stove and wet leaves from the yard. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "They'll tell you that you're the mistake in this family. Don't you believe a word of it. Mistakes don't get remembered this carefully." I didn't understand what she meant by remembered. I thought she meant loved. I was 12. I let it go. What I did notice, even then, was the way my mother talked about the lake house when Grandma wasn't around, not as a place, as an asset. "That land alone is worth more than she thinks," she said once to my father, not knowing I was on the stairs. "She should sell it before the market shifts." My father said nothing. That was his way. Silence instead of disagreement. I remember standing on the third stair from the top, feeling something cold settle in my stomach that I didn't have a name for yet. By the time I was 17, I understood that my grandmother's love for me wasn't just affection, it was strategy. I didn't know why yet. I just knew that when I was near her, I mattered in a way I never did at home, and somewhere underneath that, quiet and unspoken, something was being built. I just couldn't see the shape of it. There's one memory I keep coming back to. I was 15, and we were in her workshop behind the house, a small building that smelled like sawdust and linseed oil, sunlight coming through a dusty window in thin gold bars. She was building a jewelry box, the same kind she made every few years and gave away to someone she'd decided mattered. "This one's yours," she said, not looking up from the sanding block. "Not yet. When you're ready for it." I asked her how she'd know when I was ready. She smiled, the kind of smile that had an answer behind it she wasn't going to give me yet. "You'll know before I do," she said. "You always figure things out quietly, in your own time. That's not a flaw, Eleanor. Don't let anyone in this family convince you it is." I didn't understand the weight of that sentence then. I filed it away, the way I filed away most things she said, carefully, without knowing why. That same year, at Thanksgiving, my mother served the meal on the good china, the set she only used when Marcus brought home some new achievement to announce. He'd gotten into an honors program. She toasted him with sparkling cider, like it was champagne. When I mentioned, quietly, that I'd made the honor roll too, she said, "That's nice, sweetheart," and turned back to Marcus before I finished the sentence. My grandmother, sitting across from me, reached under the table and squeezed my hand once. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. My grandmother got sick the winter I turned 23. Slowly at first. She forgot small things, repeated stories, lost weight she didn't have to lose. Then quickly, 18 months from diagnosis to the hospice bed, in the room that used to be her sewing room, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar, even with the medical equipment crowding it. My mother visited twice a week. I never once saw her hold my grandmother's hand. She'd stand at the foot of the bed with a folder under her arm, going over logistics, as she called them. Property taxes, insurance, power of attorney forms she wanted signed, while my grandmother was too tired to read them closely. I overheard the conversation on a Tuesday in March. I wasn't meant to hear it. I'd come back into the house to get my grandmother's cardigan, and stopped in the hallway when I heard my mother's voice through the kitchen door, low and businesslike, talking to Marcus. "Once she's gone, the lake house liquidates fast. I already talked to a developer. Eleanor doesn't need to know the numbers. She'll just get emotional about it." Marcus said something about splitting it, 60-40, since he'd handled more of the responsibility. My mother agreed like it was obvious. I stood in that hallway for almost a full minute. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just listened to my own future being divided up like a spreadsheet, and I filed every word away. I said nothing that night. I brought my grandmother her cardigan. I sat with her until she fell asleep, and I watched the way her chest rose and fell, too shallow, too slow. That's the word they use for everything that used to be love, liquidate, handled, logistics. I heard it in every visit after that, the vocabulary of people who had already stopped grieving and started calculating. I started doing small things without telling anyone. I kept the porch board oiled so it wouldn't crack in the cold. I paid the property tax bill myself 1 month, when my mother forgot, using money I didn't really have to spare, just so nothing would lapse. I didn't know what I was protecting yet. I just knew I wasn't going to let it slip through anyone's fingers while I still had 2 hands. My grandmother died on a Thursday in April, just after 4 in the morning. I was the only one in the room. Her hand was still warm when I held it. I sat there a long time before I told anyone else. I realized something in that silence. To my mother and my brother, I had always been invisible, the daughter who didn't matter, the sister who didn't count. For the first time, I understood that invisibility could be a kind of power. Nobody watches the person they've already decided doesn't matter. In the weeks after the funeral arrangements began, I started noticing how differently my mother and I moved through the house. She walked through it with a clipboard, mentally tagging furniture, mentioning appraisers under her breath. I walked through it, memorizing things instead. The exact shade the afternoon light turned the kitchen wall, the specific creak of the 3rd porch board, the smell of the cedar chest in the hallway that still held a sweater my grandmother never got to wear again. I found myself doing small, unnoticed acts of care. I fixed a loose hinge on the workshop door. I brought in the porch furniture before a storm nobody else remembered was coming. I paid the property tax bill 1 month out of my own savings when I realized my mother had let the due date slip, distracted by conversations I wasn't supposed to have overheard. Nobody thanked me for any of it. Nobody noticed at all, and somewhere in that quiet, unnoticed work, I stopped waiting for them to. The funeral was on a Saturday. My mother pulled me into the hallway of the funeral home beforehand, gripping my elbow harder than she needed to. "Don't make a scene today," she said. "Don't embarrass this family. Speak when spoken to." I smiled. I nodded. 3 days later, a courier delivered an envelope to my apartment. Inside was a handwritten letter from my grandmother, dated 6 years earlier, and a business card for a lawyer named Nathaniel Cole. The letter read, "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and it's time you understood what I built quietly, for you, while everyone else was busy planning to divide what they thought was theirs. Call Nathaniel. He's been waiting." I sat with that letter for 2 full days before I called. Nathaniel Cole's office smelled like old paper and pipe tobacco, nothing like the sterile lawyers' offices I'd imagined. He was maybe 60, unhurried, and he already knew my name before I said it. Your grandmother came to me 6 years ago, he said, sliding a folder across the desk. She set up an irrevocable trust, the lake house, the surrounding 12 acres, and a controlling interest in her furniture business, all held in trust, with you as sole beneficiary. It was never part of her estate, it was never hers to leave to anyone else, and it was never your mother's or brother's to sell. I sat very still. She never told me. She wanted you to earn the understanding of it, not just the asset, he said. She told me once, Eleanor's the only one who ever came to me without wanting something. I want her to keep it that way as long as possible. He walked me through what my mother and Marcus didn't know yet. The deed transfer had been recorded quietly 6 years ago. The developer my mother had already been negotiating with had no idea they were in talks to buy land that legally could never be sold by the people they were talking to. My mother's 60-40 split with Marcus was a conversation about property neither of them had ever actually owned. Nathaniel also handed me a second folder that day, the deed history, the trust filings, and a short handwritten note my grandmother had left specifically for the moment I sat in that chair. You never once asked me for anything, it read. Not money, not attention, not a place in this family that others fought over. That's exactly why I trusted you with all of it. Protect the house the way you protected me, quietly and without asking permission. I read that note 3 times before I could put it down. Nathaniel didn't rush me. He just refilled my water glass and waited, the way I imagine he'd waited for my grandmother countless times over the 6 years they'd worked on this together without a single member of my family knowing. There's one more thing, he said eventually. Your mother has already reached out to my office once, thinking I represented the estate generally. I didn't correct her assumption. She doesn't know I represent the trust. She doesn't know the trust exists at all. That same week, I overheard my mother on the phone with the developer, finalizing numbers, a closing date, a price, a signing scheduled for the following month. She sounded lighter than I'd heard her in months, already spending money that was never hers to spend. I texted Nathaniel 2 words that night. I'm ready. Have you ever had to stay silent to protect yourself, even when every part of you wanted to speak up? Tell me in the comments. I read them. That night, I lay awake, thinking about my mother and Marcus, falling asleep certain they'd already won. They had no idea the ground under their plan had never existed at all. Nathaniel laid it out for me in plain terms over the following 2 weeks. The trust would formally transfer administration to me as trustee once I signed a set of acceptance documents. Once signed, I would have full legal authority over the property and the business shares, authority my mother and Marcus had never held to begin with, no matter what conversations they'd already had with buyers. There's no ambiguity here, he said. This isn't a fight you can lose. It's a fact you're stepping into. My mother tried one last time to reach me the week before the signing. She called, her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. I know things have been hard between us, she said. Maybe we split the lake house proceeds 3 ways instead of 2. You, me, Marcus, family should stick together. I said, I'll think about it. My cousin Ava, 16, and sharp enough to notice things nobody explained to her, cornered me at a family lunch that same week. Something's different about you, she said. You're not scared of Aunt Diane anymore. I told her I'd explain someday. She nodded like she already half understood. Marcus tried a different approach than my mother. He showed up at my apartment, unannounced, holding a bottle of wine like a peace offering. He talked about how hard the last few months had been on all of us, how Grandma would have wanted the family to stay close, how he'd always looked out for me growing up, even if it didn't always look that way. I let him talk. I poured the wine and didn't drink much of mine. When he finally asked, gently, casually, whether I'd heard anything yet from any lawyers, I just shrugged and said I hadn't been thinking about any of that. He left 40 minutes later, satisfied, certain nothing had changed. The night before the signing, I drove out to the lake house alone. I sat on the porch, on that same third board that always creaked, and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back for months. I wish this were different. I wish my mother had been the kind of mother who would have taught me to sand wood by hand instead of teaching me how to read a room for danger. I wish she had wanted me the way she wanted Marcus's grades and his internship offers. But wishes don't rebuild what was never built. This house does. I cried on that porch, not because I was breaking, but because for the first time in years I understood exactly what my grandmother had been protecting, and it wasn't property. It was me. The signing was scheduled for 11:50 p.m., a video call with Nathaniel and a notary present online, timed deliberately before the developer's closing date the next morning. I sat alone in my apartment, laptop open on the kitchen table, the rest of the building silent around me. Nathaniel's face appeared on screen, calm as always. "Ready when you are," he said. I signed. My hand didn't shake. "Josephine would be proud," Nathaniel said quietly, after the notary confirmed everything was in order. "She always said you'd do this without needing anyone's permission." The clock on my laptop read 12:03 a.m. I am 29. I am trustee. Across the city, I knew my mother was asleep, her phone charging on the nightstand, a signing appointment with the developer still marked on her calendar for 9 that morning. Marcus was asleep too, probably dreaming about the 40% he thought was coming to him. He'd find out otherwise in about 9 hours. The developer's office called my mother at 9:15 the next morning. I wasn't there for that call, but I heard about it later, second-hand, through Ava, who was there when it happened. My mother's meeting was supposed to be a formality, final signatures, a handshake, a check. Instead, the developer's lawyer told her the property could not legally be transferred because it hadn't belonged to the estate in 6 years. My mother reportedly went silent for almost a full minute. That afternoon, she called me. Her voice had none of the softness from the week before. "What did you do?" she said. "I signed some paperwork," I said. "Grandma set it up years ago. You can call Nathaniel Cole if you want the details." There was a long pause. "You knew this whole time?" "No," I said. "I found out 3 weeks ago, the same way you're finding out now." Marcus called an hour after that, his voice sharp, almost cracking. He'd already told his friends about the deal, already talked about buying a boat with his share. He asked me if I thought this made me better than him. I told him it wasn't about better, it was about who had actually shown up. We all ended up in the same room 2 days later, at a small family gathering my aunt had organized before any of this happened, a birthday lunch for Ava that nobody wanted to cancel. My mother pulled me aside near the kitchen, the same hallway maneuver she'd used my whole life, gripping my elbow just slightly too hard. "You could have told me," she said quietly, "before all of this became public. You could have asked me anything, ever, that wasn't about the house," I said. She didn't have an answer for that. She looked at me like I was still the girl who apologized for existing at the dinner table. I wasn't. I hadn't been for months. My grandmother used to say, "Mistakes don't get remembered this carefully." I always thought she meant that she loved me, despite what my family called me. She meant something bigger. She meant that she had spent years quietly building something no one could take from me, because she'd seen exactly who I was, long before I saw it myself. My mother and Marcus never got the lake house. The developer walked away from the deal entirely once the truth came out, and Marcus, who'd already borrowed against money he never had, spent the better part of a year paying it back. My mother and I speak maybe twice a year now, short and careful conversations, nothing like before, but nothing pretending either. Nathaniel still manages the trust's business interests. He sends me a card every April, around the anniversary of my grandmother's death, and never mentions the date directly. He doesn't have to. As for me, I still have the lake house. The porch board still creaks on the 3rd step. I sanded the whole railing down by hand last spring, no electric sander, just like she taught me. I think about my grandmother every time I sit on that porch, shelling something in my hands, even when there's nothing to shell. And I think, some people build you a future, others just build a case for why you don't deserve one. I know now which one actually loved me. If you've ever had to stay quiet while someone underestimated you, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe. There are more to come.